The two ICH guidance documents, Q8 Pharmaceutical Development and Q9 Quality Risk Management, provide a science and risk-based approach to the development of pharmaceutical products. These two also represent a paradigm shift in the development, commercialization, transfer, and management throughout the product lifecycle. We consider this course as a seamless continuation of the introduction to system validation and qualification. So, if you haven't completed this previous course and understood the key concepts behind the validation and qualification process, we recommend you start there. Now, in this advanced course, we will discuss the system validation and qualification phases. Here, you will acquire a solid understanding of the science and risk-based approach to process validation, from information and knowledge in product development activities to defining a control strategy for the manufacturing process. Annex 15 of EU GMP states that qualification activities should cover all stages from initial development of the user requirement specification through to the end of use of the equipment, facility, utility, or system. For the qualification process, we can use the V model. There are others, but the V model is the most common. It is important to understand that this V model is based on risk assessment principles. It is an evolving process and needs to be updated from time to time. Changes in the project, facilities, and systems will require a re-evaluation of the risk assessment document. Let's review all of its stages independently. Phase 1 is placed at the start of the left side of the V model. The very first thing to define are the User Requirement Specifications, URS. This is a document that defines the specifications of equipment, facilities, utilities, or systems. The URS should define clearly and precisely what the end user wants or really needs. This is the point of reference used in the validation lifecycle. URS are written by the organization that is the owner of the system, facility, or equipment. Ideally, the emphasis of a URS is on the required functions and not the method of implementation. It focuses on the what rather than the how. When you write a URS, you are the end user's advocate. You need to make sure that all possibilities are considered and that you have included all requirements. Your goal is to write a comprehensive specification that is both detailed enough to serve as a development template and broad enough to include all desired functionality. So, the document should contain the user requirements related to documentation, environment, materials, safety, and maintenance. Here are our favorite tips and tricks to write a good URS document. Firstly, each requirement statement should be uniquely numbered and not longer than 250 words. The URS should be consistent and the requirement statements should not be duplicating or contradicting other requirements. Remember to specify requirements and not dictate a solution. The focus should be on what is required, but not how it is to be achieved. It is important to know that each requirement should be testable. This will allow the tests to be designed as soon as the URS is finalized. And finally, each requirement should be prioritized as mandatory, as per GXP requirements or desirable by the user. Note that mandatory requirements are the only ones that should be tested in the qualification phase. Otherwise, desirable requirements increase the good use or comfort of the user, but are not requirements from GXP regulations. A functional specification is a document that describes how a process or a system will operate. These functional specifications are written by the supplier after the URS are provided by the owner. It does not contain any highly technical detail. Rather, it describes how the system will operate according to the user requirement specifications. It also describes how people will interact with it and what to expect when different operational scenarios occur. Design specifications describe what the system, equipment, or facility should do and how it should do it, in line with the URS and the functional specifications. Design specifications describe what the system, equipment, or facility should do and how it should do it, in line with the URS and the functional specifications. Design specifications are prepared by the supplier or implementer. There are two key moments to be faced before introducing a new equipment: a factory acceptance testing, FAT, and a site acceptance testing, SAT. The factory acceptance testing is usually performed by the manufacturer to verify the new equipment meets its intended purpose prior to approval for delivery to a customer. Once the equipment arrives at its final destination and is installed, a site acceptance testing is run by the purchasing organization as part of the commissioning activity. Once an equipment or system is built and installed on a site, the next step is the qualification phase. This phase consists of three parts: installation qualification, IQ, operational qualification, OQ, and performance qualification, PQ. Compliance to all three phases improves the overall knowledge of the equipment, process, or system and assures that the process has been well developed, well maintained, and operates as it should. It reduces the risks involved and expenses of routine processes. Let's discuss it one by one. Remember that all activities need to be well documented. Remember, if it is not written, it does not exist. The installation qualification includes the verifications of the correct installation of equipment, systems, instruments, and components. Some verifications are needed in this phase. For example, perform a visual inspection of the packaging when it is received. Perform a visual inspection of the system after the unpackaging to detect any damage. You also need to verify the installation according to the specifications and drawings and against specific acceptance criteria. Check that the technical environment, for example, the safety, environmental conditions, installation site, is in agreement with the system or equipment to be installed. You should collect all the documentation supplied by the vendor, like the instructions and maintenance requirements. Collect and check the certification or verification of the materials of construction from the supplier. And last but not least, check there are calibration certificates for instruments and sensors that ensure they have been verified and calibrated. The operational qualification is executed after performing the installation qualification. The OQ consists of testing the system, process, and equipment to ensure it is operating as expected as defined by the design made by the supplier. The specifications are used to check that the features are in compliance within the whole specifications acceptance criteria. So, it is usual to test at the upper and lower limits. This is a worst-case approach. For example, in the case of a climatic chamber used to perform the stability studies, you could perform a temperature mapping in empty conditions and real conditions. Another test should be to carry out trials that include the upper and lower operating limits of temperature and humidity. Another important test is to check the effectiveness of alarms, controllers, or recording systems. And finally, you should carry out a simulation test of startup and shutdown systems. It may happen that the climatic chamber works differently if it is empty or full. So, performing tests at both conditions should be beneficial and would require the presence of the product. In this case, you could use a placebo. Once the OQ tests are executed, this phase can be completed with the preparation of SOPs and cleaning procedures. Training sessions should be done to personnel for use and maintenance of the system or equipment. It is good practice to write an intermediate IQ report. Once the installation and operational qualification have been approved, the performance qualification is then carried out under actual operating conditions and with the same products or materials or a placebo with the same or equivalent characteristics of the product. The tests in the PQ should cover the operating range of the intended process. In the example of the climatic chamber, the verification steps of the PQ can be compared to the results obtained during the OQ tests. The specifications could include the acceptance criteria for temperature homogeneity over a defined period of time. The maximum temperature variation would also give information about temperature stability. Other possible tests could be the comparison of the temperature set point of the chamber with the real temperature. And finally, the recovery time for the temperature at different temperature set points in the chamber to return to the established regime after a disturbance. It is also good practice to write an intermediate PQ report. The validation report is a document that summarizes the results that have been collected in the previous phases, the IQ, OQ, and PQ. A conclusion section is also expected. Results are compared with the established acceptance criteria defined previously in each phase. If results are not complying with the acceptance criteria, a deviation should be recorded and an in-depth investigation should be performed. Changes to acceptance criteria cannot be done unless they are justified scientifically. No open issues should be left when the final validation report is completed. If open issues still remain to be completed and closed, an assessment should be done. It is not usual to use a system or equipment with open issues. Otherwise, CAPAs should be implemented and followed upon during system use. We also recommend preparing a traceability matrix as a summary of the qualification process. A traceability matrix is a document that maps and traces the URS with the test cases. The main purpose is to validate that all requirements are checked via test cases such that no functionality is unchecked. The traceability matrix should be prepared once the URS and functional specifications are completed. This is a living document that is completed throughout the qualification cycle. According to Annex 15 of the EU GMP, an initial qualification of the equipment, facilities, utilities, and systems is not enough. Requalification should not be established, for example, every year for all your systems and equipment. Periodicity could be lower or higher depending on the risk scoring. It is important to know that requalification should not be understood as a repetition of the initial full qualification. Instead, partial repetition of the PQ or specific critical tests can be done if properly justified. It is more a review of data from routine operation. The specification parameters are usually considered and analyzed, as well as the changes in the equipment and the deviations that took place in the period considered. The document should end with a conclusion that informs about the equipment state. If big changes are made to a system or equipment, the risk assessment will need to be updated and a complete qualification should be executed. A process validation is usually referred to the establishment of documented evidence that a manufacturing process of a medicinal product does what it purports to do. It is different from process qualification, which is linked to equipment and systems. EMA and FDA definitions of process validation agree that documented evidence with data is needed to demonstrate that a process is capable of meeting pre-established specifications and quality requirements. According to Annex 15, manufacturing processes may be developed using a traditional approach or a continuous verification approach. In the original FDA guidance from 1987, Guideline on General Principles of Process Validation was focused on testing, instrument qualification, process robustness, and repeatability. This is called the traditional approach. This traditional approach was mainly used before the FDA published the Guideline Process Validation General Principle and Practices in 2011. This guidance referred to the technological advances in manufacturing as well as implementation of modern risk management and quality system tools and concepts to update the approach. Basically, the quality, safety, and efficacy are to be built into the product. It means that quality cannot be adequately assured only by in-process and finished product inspection and testing. Therefore, each step of a manufacturing process is to be controlled to assure that the finished product meets all quality attributes, including specifications. New guidelines address a process validation lifecycle and quality risk management across all stages of the lifecycle. The continuous process verification approach is an alternative to the traditional process validation approach. It is based on the application of a life cycle approach according to quality by design and risk assessment. Now, I would like to open a parenthesis to explain the main differences of three types of process validation in case you hear about them. Traditionally, there were three different types of process validations: prospective, concurrent, and retrospective. Prospective validation establishes documented evidence that a process does what it purports to do based on a pre-planned protocol. It is conducted prior to the distribution of a new product or a product produced in a modified production process. The pre-planned scientific approach includes the following steps: design, development, qualification, and production. It was generally considered acceptable that 3 consecutive batches within the finally agreed parameters, giving a product of the desired quality, would constitute a proper validation of the process. It is a confirmation on the commercial 3 batches before marketing. The big question here is if CGMP regulations still require that 3 successful process validation batches are produced before an active substance or a finished drug product is released for distribution. The response from the FDA is clearly no. The FDA does not specify a minimum number of batches to validate a manufacturing process. The agency is now recommending a product lifecycle approach. Manufacturing processes using the traditional approach should undergo a prospective validation program whenever possible prior to certification of the product. Concurrent validation establishes documented evidence that a process does what it purports to do based on information generated during actual implementation of the process. It is not a recommended approach as a routine process validation. Retrospective validation establishes documented evidence that a process does what it purports to do based on review and analysis of historic information. However, retrospective validation is no longer an acceptable approach. This phase is also termed ongoing process validation. It requires verification that the process is maintained in a state of control throughout the product life cycle. When quality by design is used as an approach to develop the process based on an established control strategy, continuous process verification can be used as an alternative to traditional process validation. There is a control strategy for the required attributes for incoming materials, critical quality attributes, and critical process parameters to confirm product realization. Regular evaluation of the control strategy is also performed. In this approach, the number of batches necessary to demonstrate a high level of assurance that the process is capable of consistently delivering a quality product is determined based on scientific justification. According to FDA guidance, Process Validation, General Principle and Practices from 2011, process validation involves 3 stages over the life cycle of the product and process: process thinking, process qualification, and continued process verification. In the process design phase, the goal is to build knowledge and understanding obtained during the development phase and scale-up activities and establish a strategy for process control. The commercial manufacturing process is defined based on knowledge gained through development and scale-up activities. Critical process parameters, CPPs, are identified. The process is established to define acceptable limits for the critical process parameters in order to meet the critical quality attributes, CQAs, of the products. In the process qualification phase, the process design information from the previous stage is evaluated to determine if the process is capable of reproducing the commercial manufacturing quality. In this stage, you will confirm if the process consistently yields a product meeting the specifications when the process is operated within the normal operating range or design space. This stage has 2 elements. Number 1, design of the facility and qualification of the equipment and utilities, and number 2, process performance qualification, PPQ. The objective of the first element, design of the facility and qualification of the equipment and utilities, is to ensure that facilities have been designed properly and that commissioning is done before proceeding with the process performance qualification, PPQ. The second element is the process performance qualification. A number of defined PPQ batches will be manufactured to conform the process design and demonstrate that the commercial manufacturing process performs as expected. This stage combines the qualified facility, utilities, equipment, and the trade personnel with the commercial manufacturing process, control procedures, and components to produce commercial batches. The purpose of high sampling practice is to ensure that validation batches are meeting the acceptance criteria, ensure the homogeneity of the batch, ensure the reproducibility of consecutive batches, and demonstrate the equivalence of equipment performance. If the PPQ is successful, it will confirm the process design is correct and demonstrate that the commercial manufacturing process performs as expected. Once stages 1 and 2 are completed, the process is validated and approved by the authorities. Now, in the continued process verification stage, routine production provides ongoing assurance that the process remains in a state of control on a batch-to-batch basis through the process control strategy. In practice, an ongoing program to collect and analyze product and process data that relate to product quality is established and followed. The data about quality of incoming materials or components, in-process material, and finished products is collected, trended, and statistically evaluated. The performance of the process identifies potential issues and determines whether action must be taken to correct and prevent problems. The CAPA system and change control management will also provide enough data to be evaluated during the product quality review to ensure that the process remains validated. Thank you for attending this course. I hope you find it useful and that you have learned what you expected. See you in other courses at Scilife Academy to continue your learning journey.